here we are. So I'm gonna have to start
first
it.
Time.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
First time.
start it with the synchronization of the video and sound. So I'm gonna have to clap. But now here we are, really.
Here we are. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me do an intro for you. You are none other than a friend of mine. You are somebody who's called Lorenz. Matter of fact, your full name is Lorenz Sauer. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and you are my molecular biologist from Vienna, Austria, who graduated in the top 5% of his class,
Right.
a passionate reader of popular science and sci-fi, and you are about to set to explore the limits of reality. Well, I'll be asking questions about how you are doing this in no time. So yeah, let's get into it. But let me just talk to you about your perspective and introduce the readers and the audience to this kind of idea that you have had. Your perspective has changed after taking an Annenberg psychology course where you realized the biggest limitation
Oh yeah.
is a biased human brain.
Mind, yeah. Brain, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh my God, I like that idea. We're gonna have to talk about that. But initially, you were skeptical of Elon Musk, Bitcoin, and even climate change. And as part of the European progressive views, you embraced libertarian values, advocating for free markets and criticizing publicly funded education. Interesting take.
Yeah.
Interesting take. You even critique state-funded education, as one perhaps should. We will see.
We shall see, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that soon in no time. You also have a view about the S&P 500 as an evidence of natural irreducible evolution. And your political journey is driven by a desire to raise children in a world where ownership and responsibility are valued.
Exactly.
Yes. And you are focused less on a political divide and more on whether a system can create wealth or drain it. That's a good one. I like that. So yeah, and recently, this is big news. You have turned your attention to AI, driven by a deep, albeit secular bond with humanity, and a belief that capital fuels usefulness in a recursive loop, promising a longer and better life for most, within the probabilistic nature of the universe. That's an intro you told me.
That's a mouthful. Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
it's compressing a lot of my evolution, of my personal history of the decades. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Into the essence of it. Also,
And do you want me to tell the audience where they can reach you? Because you sent me your email address as
I
well.
think Twitter is probably the best for that.
Okay, what's your Twitter? Can you
nobody's
spell that
using-
for us?
Yeah, it's Cogentia on Twitter.
Okay,
basically.
how do you spell that?
Like cogent, except for cogent and tia, like the Latin.
So it's C-O...
Cogncia.
Okay, at x.com.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
cool, very cool. So,
Or just looking me up by the name, Lorenz Sauer. Yeah.
okay, that's very cool.
Google.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how are you feeling?
Good.
Awesome.
Ready to roll and probably get my perspectives out into the world.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about three big things. You named these three big things, and you called me up no later than 12 hours ago or something like that. And then you were like,
That's right.
let's do a podcast, Patrick. And I was just like, sure, let's do a podcast. And then you said
Exactly right,
like,
yeah.
I got three big ideas for you. And these three big ideas were what?
It's
Money, language, and groups, right?
Yeah, exactly that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I wrote them down, and a matter of fact, I asked people, some friends of ours, some mutual friends of ours, great friends of ours, to help us with creating great questions for you. So Bogi, our good friend, and Andre, our good friend, actually submitted questions for you to answer.
Did they?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's news to me, yeah.
Do you wanna start with the first question they submitted, or do you wanna?
Sure, it's just
first.
whatever the universe throws at me.
Awesome. So, how has your relationship with money evolved over time, and can you describe an experience that significantly altered your views about wealth?
Oh, wow. That is a mouthful. So yeah, definitely my views completely changed over time. First of all, because money isn't something that is actually integral to the education system. And most of the education that we have or that we get is like kind of a zero-sum game where the state is making lives better of the people by taking money from people and then redistributing it to other people that are more in need of that. But through that, you're automatically assuming like it's a zero-sum game. Money is taken from A and put into pockets of B.
But it's not.
Exactly. So it doesn't really, the state is not trying to educate where money is actually coming from. And so this was a very long journey to kind of drill down the rabbit hole to ultimately get some answers, which I did not actually get from various sources. It just came together. All was kind of, if you think of fire sparking the light of consciousness in humanity, of course there were many more inventions, but that was really a boost in energy consumption.
Right.
You could then enable any kind of source of energy in terms of food by sterilizing it, by making it more digestible.
Right.
That had a huge impact also on our own evolution through our biology. Yeah, the genes that you can trace down in the lineage.
Do you believe money is much like fire?
The understanding of it, though, is definitely related to that. So, my personal understanding now of money is really that it's about narratives. It's a shared hallucination. It's a tool to exchange productivity into a productivity token, basically. And it's created through future trustable narratives of productivity and resources. So that the narratives of a future resource of productivity, which is coming from a trustable source, is what is creating money, or in the opposite, also destroying money.
Right.
So a narrative that, of course, it has to manifest later on into the real world.
But
so
sometimes it doesn't.
The trust goes down, right?
Yes.
The source of the narrative is no longer trusted.
Right.
And it also goes the opposite way. So if you have war, then it destroys all of that, because basically it's a degrowth story now.
Right.
But there is less resources. There will be less productivity.
Right.
And we have also in our education system, there's a lot of people that say basically that war is actually a driver of productivity. And that is not true at all. What is the real driver in that scenario, of which basically stuff came out for humanity, is really the constraint. When you are constrained, heavily constrained, then this is the mother of all invention. Basically,
They say necessity is the mother of invention.
And what is invention? Again, it's basically a narrative of a future productivity kick. Boost.
That's amazing, man. So let me walk you through the next question then. What's your definition of financial freedom? How does one particularly achieve it in practical ways, I assume? And how does one become not overly obsessed with money?
I think the deeper the understanding of money is, the less you obsess about it. And this is most exemplified kind of by Elon Musk. Because unlike the media stories, I want to step back a little bit. So any kind of observer basically has some intelligence. And intelligence is the prediction of the future, token, word, sentence, phrase, book, etc., through the compression of the past negative surprises or slash discrepancies. We can call them discrepancies, which also tells you that you actually have to do action in the physical world to then get information back from the universe, from the world. So that you're not basically just building stuff up in a mental model slash language that gives you not something that is actually useful in the physical world. And this happens a lot. I would say there is intelligence and the opposite is ignorance.
Okay.
So not knowing something. And then there's smartness and the opposite is stupidity. And smartness is actually knowing the error bars of your intelligence.
Right.
So how far is it actually implementable in the physical world?
Right. I want to ask you this question. I think it's an interesting one. Hope you like it.
Yeah.
So some people say ignorance is bliss. And when it comes to projects, people who are just starting out new projects are almost always an advantage because they don't know what they don't know. Therefore, they can try a lot of things and don't worry about the limitations. Do you think ignorance is bliss, or what does it take?
My take is that it's definitely true. The reason for that is that when you, through AI, what was the most surprising outcome actually, is that we have a language model and all our reasoning is done actually through that language model. Mm-hmm. So we reason in words. So language is actually a collective mapping of your species, of the external world into your brain, of course through education and so on. But education itself is something I would love to talk about. And once you have that, then you can reason at the speed of sound within your brain, or in a data center at the speed of light, basically. And that is an amazing ability, which you can then feed into other models, other brain regions, that then exert action in the physical world. And you don't have to, you should rather imagine all of these knowledge within a human as a multimodal model. So the key is always emotions, and emotions basically is another network that classifies all the participating networks in real time, all the brain regions in real time, and puts it into a category. Is that good? Is that positive? And it becomes more and more nuanced. And a feeling is the metacognition about these emotional states. Actually, it goes down in a layered thing where you can recursively reflect upon even the reflection about the feelings. So you can layer these feelings very nuanced.
You mentioned that you want to talk about education as well. I used to have this idea that education is unfair because, and then stick with me because this will be an interesting idea, I hope. So there was this idea back in the day of feudalism, that people had to work on the land, and there was a landowner, and then you worked for the landowner, and you couldn't advance yourself in society much because that was your job. That was your job, to work on the land as a landowner. It was called feudalism. And then something of a more revolutionary societal change happened, and then we entered in the realm of, I would say economic development and capitalism. And then there you can advance yourself by the idea of debt. You could actually get debt for a future narrative that you believed in, and you could say, I don't have the resources, but this future narrative will get me there, and I need this right now, and I will repay my debt later. And this was an advancement first made in Europe, I believe, and or maybe in Asian Mesopotamia or whatever. I don't know much about it, but there was a time then where Hungarians couldn't get debt because even the greatest nobleman, who was called Széchenyi, now Throwbath is named after this guy, was mad and furiously mad about the fact that he had a narrative that he wanted to build a better nation, better ground and soil for himself, but he couldn't get the support because he couldn't get the debt that he wanted or the resources that he wanted. And now I think it's an interesting thing about student debt because, like, you can get the resources for your education if you're a student, you can get student debt. But my challenge that is, like, if you have a qualification, NEC-REPID, like certification by an institution like a university, why would you not use that as resource for a narrative? And why would you not say, hey, because in Hungary, for example, if you don't have a job, you cannot get money from a bank. And I'm like, I think that's ludicrous. As someone who's like, I have been in a situation where I needed the money, but I didn't have a job. I wanted a new computer to work at a job that I was going to do freelancing with. And I couldn't get it from a bank because they were like, you don't have a real job or whatever, therefore we cannot give you money. And I was just like, but I have an education.
Yeah. We should probably start off with feudalism. right?
Yeah.
It's a very long, winding road that you just depicted here.
Yeah.
From feudalism to debt and your own personal history about financing a computer. We have this wonderful principle in physics. And by the way, I love that quote from Elon Musk that basically everything abides by physics. So what
he also says that it's like if the laws of physics doesn't prevent you, then it's probably possible.
Yeah. So exactly. Basically everything abides by the laws of physics. He has only seen people break the laws of man, but not of physics.
Right.
And that's it in a nutshell. There's this beautiful principle in physics that is permeating everything, and that's called the principle of least action.
Right.
Of it comes quantum mechanics, mechanics itself, electrodynamics, and a lot of other stuff, including, of course, the specific implementation for it for gravity, which is the special theory of relativity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you imagine basically a ball in a landscape going down a path, it takes the quickest and shortest route directly to the bottom. Yes. It never takes a winding road within it.
Yes.
And all of this is guided by this wonderful principle of least action.
Right.
Which, especially when it comes to light, is really something to see. You can see that literally in an experiment. It's hard to accept that, but it's literally seeing is believing in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So you can point a laser beam and it will show up in a graded diffraction pattern, for instance, that is several centimeters.
How is this possibly connected to depth and money?
Oh, yeah. The thing is basically with the least action principle that you need a group, and a group of people is better together if there's one leader and everybody else is following. If you have everybody leading, then there's a lot of friction, a lot of energy is wasted on that.
Right.
And it's basically not a group in this case. So if you then imagine the energy landscape of the ball from the hill, the high friction state, high energy state, dropping down into the bottom, then we have a group that is harmonious, that is working together. And at that point, you have the leader with all the power kind of to steer the collective group towards a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And what you then, if you then go out further and you take this thought experiment of the group, basically, into an even larger group, then you get, like, say, a group that is dominating a land of several square miles or hundreds of square miles. Then you need to have a more professional, you need to have kind of step it up. Exactly. Yeah. You need to have people, professional, that are paid by money rather than by favors and tit for that to do their work. And you get to a nation state at some point.
Right.
That's the huge difference. And so you then have the leadership, basically the feudal people, the kings, and the peasants and innovators, which are aligned with whoever has the power. And what happens during the evolution of the group basically is that the people, the smart people, they will align with the feudal people, obviously, to gain resources with the least amount of effort. And this is where we come to the least action principle and where it ties back, because our own evolution from the bottom up, from the atomic level, to ever bigger molecules, is also guided by energy constraints, by the least action principle. It is pervasive to every aspect of everything in the physical world. So the actual world, the base reality that we cannot interface with, but we are still part of eventually. That's most striking when we die, basically. We disintegrate, bacteria eats us away, and something new happens, basically. Some molecules are returned to the planet, others are staying within the realms of biology. Yeah. Changed from one species to another.
Yeah. I understand the least action principle. At the same time, I also want to urge the people who are revolutionaries to not take the least action principle, because I think Progress can also happen outside the boundaries of the least.
The key here is that it's always in human history, which is around 5,000 years. And it started basically, you need a media to write something, to put some ideas into language, and then eventually on the media to impart it on the next generation efficiently. So what happens is that it's always a story about basically a group which you can measure. A nation state is a experiment in human organization. There have been many experiments in that, and they have usually always failed because it becomes a power play. It doesn't even matter which side or how you want to describe it can be socialism, it can be communism, it can be totalitarianism or like fascism and stuff like that. It's usually around power, and it becomes rather degenerate, where the echo chamber becomes so loud, and it's always around the feudal people trying to extract the resources from the peasants and innovators with the least amount of effort. And at that point, because you're competing on this planet against other groups who are which are a different experiment of human organization, which are doing it better. And so eventually competition wins out, and you through the short straw.
Yeah.
Or the long straw. It depends which nation state you belong to in history.
Right. So let's stick to the idea of financial freedom then. What is your definition of financial freedom in this world?
That's a good one. So financial freedom is the point, I would say, at which you no longer think about money as affording you something, where it's really starting to become about agency, a story about agency. And this is one of the most fascinating changes in my own perspective that happened very, very recently, actually. Because the more intelligent thing to say is basically that the true currency is not money, it's time. But that isn't true either. It's really that you can derive a formula of agency where part of that equation will be your health, like 10%. All of these have different components and different equations that you then have to summate, that you then have to add up. Another is definitely a shielding factor, your social network, your environment, like say which nation you belong to. Of course, it's also integral to the social network, because you have a different social network in Los Angeles than like here in Budapest. What else? I kind of forgot the other terms, but it's like 6 or 7 things, concrete things that you can identify as factors that are very crucial to your agency. And agency is nothing else than you as an agent, as an intelligent, embodied thing, projecting power action into the physical world. That's why you can be very smart, with the brightest, best person in the world. But if you only sit at home and you ruminate within your language model, your human language model, you're not doing very much.
Yeah, because you said action is the necessary and sufficient component for growth.
Exactly. Action produces information. And the most information-rich thing that you can have is failure. You just call it culturally like that.
Right. Yeah.
So all these classifications are within a culture. And culture is where this triangle of a group and language and money comes in.
We're going to segue onto language in no time.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask one last question about money. Can you share an investment or financial decision you've made that taught you a valuable lesson, whether it succeeded or failed?
Yeah.
Well, the time you bought a Maserati, Lamborghini, whatever sports car.
Yeah, kind of. Actually, there is also a story with a car.
Really?
I was under the impression that I could save a lot of money basically by living in a camper van and enjoying the networks, the different cities that I can get to, at the same time of not paying rent.
Makes sense.
And later on, I realized that a car is a liability. It needs to be insured. It loses value over time because automatically people assume that if it's built like 10 years ago, that it has less value, which is also true in many ways. It's also for the insurance company, etc. So you're constantly reducing the value. it was at the same time also a personal love project of autonomy. For the first time, it could have installed enough battery capacity along with solar panels to actually power a modern kind of living standard.
Wow.
Computers and stuff like that.
Wow.
In the end, I sold it and I did not lose any money on that. Other than that, investments.
What's the lesson learned?
The lesson learned here is that I lost money because I could have put it into a real estate market, into assets that produce that don't necessarily that have utility. In this case, it only really had utility for myself.
Right.
If it has utility for other people, it's way more lucrative. Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, lastly, is every investment will eventually also turn sour. See, investing.
So I haven't heard about this. Why did you say this?
Because you have to do in a portfolio, and you have to invest into sufficient different sources, and eventually you will have negative surprises, which brings you forward. As we define intelligence, basically as the prediction of the future through the past, through the compression of the past negative surprises. So this is really what kicks you forward and makes you an expert in anything. The negative surprises.
Wow. We're going to take a pause. I like working with small files. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't checking out the bottom of your Instagram.
Exactly. It loads so slowly.
Yeah. 1 second. This is recording.
That's why you only want to keep 30 photos or so.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah, some people do that, but I think it's cool. And it must have been a fun story. I know some things in life are like, that's an interesting question too. So like, what do you think about like fun? Because I know that there's these movements that prioritize health over spending on certain things like alcohol or something like this. But is there a financial health to this aspect as well? Do you know what is this concept?
Wow, so fun is a really interesting construct, and again, it's an emotion. Obviously, to classify your participating brain regions into a classification where you are obviously in doing something positive, but not too much positive, because the brain tells you its energy consumption. It tells you through the feeling of entertainment, because you really want to have these negative surprises that push you not over the edge, obviously, but you want to feel pain. So that is the brain telling you it consumes more energy, basically.
Okay.
And it's also interesting because fun in terms of alcohol consumption, as we have here in Europe, is kind of working, is very toxic if you think about it, because if people have a lot of fun, but they forget about it, then it's a waste in a lot of ways. And there is a health implication as well. And
I have a stance when it comes to like having fun. I think alcohol consumption has overall been a net positive for humanity, because so many people have met each other in bars and talked about the world's latest and greatest inventions, because of a drunk guy just said, "Hey, have you guys heard about the news that there's this guy invented something called Facebook or something?"
I don't think Mark was too drunk when he did that. No. And he probably didn't invite anonymous alcoholics into his team.
Yeah, okay, you're probably right. But
it's a nice story. It's just it can be overdone as well. There's statistics in some countries like the UK or also Russia, where it's a really problematic story.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. So we're going to talk about language now, because language is our second big topic. And I wrote something here. So language may be, I think, the best thing that evolutionists came up with. That's my statement. Yeah. And I think I want to classify what evolution may mean for our listeners and readers. So Charles Darwin was an honorary member of the New York Academy of Sciences, the institution I was a member of for 7 years. And Charles Darwin created the theory of evolution. So that's important. But there's a couple of misconceptions about this theory that often audiences believe. And so I'd like to point out some notable ones, namely that evolution needs progress or improvement. Whereas actually Darwin's theory doesn't suggest organisms become better, but instead, in an absolute sense, only better adapted to their specific environments. Evolution has no inherent direction towards complexity or advancement.
Mm-hmm.
Second misconception is?
It's basically blind. It's a blind process.
Yeah. And second misconception is the evolution is random. Evolution is not random. While mutations occur randomly, natural selection is a non-random process that favors beneficial traits in specific environments. So in this sense, we know that the evolution is a process that we can talk about. And I want to ask you about the evolution of language.
Yeah.
So
we
know that it's not random. We know that there are like favorable traits in the evolution of language. So tell me more about what you believe drives the evolution of language.
Yeah, there's one aspect basically in there as well. In biological evolution, you literally have dancing around floppy disks. We call them viruses. Again, a word that is very loaded because also with a lot of negativity, but there's literally no species, including bacteria, that don't have floppy disks that insert in them and basically steal valuable software from one entity and put it into another. It's like if we take, for instance, China and the US, it's kind of also a arms race of information of software. So that is a very interesting construct. So it's not that de novo from a new, every time a new gene is being developed. A gene is the information that produces a function through a protein in the physical world. And it's kind of the interface between the physical world and software. Mm-hmm. So that is one thing I wanted to say before we get into how the evolution of language works. I would actually definitely exclude it from biological evolution.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, so it's a bad question, sorry.
No, there are no bad questions, there are only negative surprises. Yes. How surprised you are now. Yeah. But
thank you.
That's basically, language is ultimately, you need a species. I would go back a little bit. One of the most wonderful things on social media is basically when you watch bats or new animals that have never been bats, like a raptor, like a crocodile or something like that. Mm-hmm. So they're the weirdest kind of bats that you can, pets that you can imagine. When they become unimaginable in terms of how domesticatable they are. Mm-hmm. Like, if they suddenly open a Cheerio box and start munching like a human or stuff like that. That is the weirdest thing that you can imagine. But it also makes you think about, like, what makes us so different? Us humans looking down, reflecting, metacognizing and so on, mm-hmm. about how the world operates. And it really boils down to that language, because we also saw this. So a lot of my insight, I'm not somebody who trusts very easily. It all came through seeing is believing. And the fire in my case was the AI revolution that started like 2 years ago. And we can literally see these digital brains. We can dissect them. We can see we can visualize them in hemispheres. We can see how emotional regions cluster together, yes. How rationality clusters together. Yes. The reason for that is, again, the least action principle. You want to have short distances because it's energetically favorable.
Yes.
And so language mapped, of course, what it also shows us, because you don't want to just have AI language models, large language models, LLMs. You also want to put that into an embodied agent that can project power agency in the physical world. Mm-hmm. And what happens is we have an arms race of robotics companies that create humanoids. Tesla is one of those. Unitree is a wonderful company as well that is really advanced and showing off insane videos where people cannot even tell if it's CGI or if it's real, but it's definitely verifiable real. Mm-hmm. And what happens is they are using LLMs to then instruct basically the motor region, the kinematics models downstream, to do stuff in the physical world. The interesting part is what some people thought initially is an artificial construct. It's working the same in humans as well. Basically, we are doing everything through language, and you can see that in how often we tell ourselves to not go to the fridge or do something, or not eat this, or have New Year's resolutions or something. And it completely is not what we end up doing. Or basically in the market, we say we act rationally. Most market participants actually know in what to invest, and they do a good choice, but they don't stick with it at the first sign of fear or an overblown market reaction. So they get into fear mode, they start selling and incur all the losses.
Right.
A month later, the market shoots up again.
Right.
They would have even made more money or more investment.
Because of the wrong language.
Yeah. Because the language model is kind of decoupled from the rest of the brain, so to speak. Okay. It's upstream of everything else. So getting to language is mapping the external world, the collective external world, through words into neurons, into your brain, basically. What we have as humans specifically is a much longer neuroplasticity windows. We have world manipulators with one hand is like 27, 25 degrees of freedom. It's insanely hard. And we have a voice box that allows us to basically communicate. So to have an identical sonar fingerprint, an audible fingerprint for every word that we can then communicate to somebody else. On top of that, we invented a media where we can have symbols with certain rules that became more and more complex. German is a good example. German is
general language.
Yeah. And we can then basically compute with this, do statistics over statistics, and compute what we call reasoning. If you do computation within language, it's called reasoning, right? Yeah, and we can do that at the speed of sound, at least in the brain. And that's the fascination here with language and why it's so powerful. Because you have the entire collective external world in which you can do computation. There is nothing that any other species I've seen can do. Yeah. And the other species with sophisticated language, like dolphins, etc.
And bees.
And bees, of course, yeah. But it's very goal-oriented, and they don't have media to impart it and compress it.
Right.
Because it's all about compression. Intelligence is compression. That's the key word. The goal is to predict the future. For you to get into a less energetic state, to use less consumption than the rest of your competitors.
Wow. I also think that outlier cases can be really meaningful. And outlier cases in the sense that there's this idea of noise to signal ratio. And then sometimes you don't know what the signal is because there's only noise. But then I believe that noise can be also perceived as an outlier case, that there's signal there, we just don't observe it. And then,
that's the key word, observing actually. So it's actually in the eye of the beholder, and not just in the eye of the beholder, but in the particular model that we're using right now, that is dominant. So in other words, the domain, first of all intelligence is domain specific. And what do I mean with domain? Domain is, for instance, one would be language itself. Another would be programming. A very logical construct of language.
Soon, almost the same thing.
Exactly. Another is motion. Another is seeing, hearing, and all these things where you have a physical transducer, basically our perception. And though we have this knowledge stored multimodally in our hippocampus, we have specialized brain regions just for these physical transducers. What is a transducer? It basically takes a signal from the universe in a physical shape and puts it into a digital or analog signal that you can then process. It puts it into information.
Right.
It encodes it into information that you can then process. And in our case, that happened naturally.
Right.
So the key takeaway with language is it's the most, like you're already into that to your listeners, It's the most powerful evolution that happened. I would say it happens primarily driven by money, which we can get to. Yeah.
Tell me more about it.
You want to know already? Okay. So something I realized very late is that money is upstream of culture and language. What do I mean with upstream? That is, first of all, intelligence is always a network. All networks are intelligent. Mm-hmm. They are adaptive networks. That means that you can adapt the strength and the connection within individual nodes. Mm-hmm. Then it also becomes a question of how the information flows. Can it back propagate, or can it only feed forward from one layer to the next one?
Right.
You also need to view kind of these networks as something that is time evolving. So there's information that flows, and then it within one node it may die off on another, because it's like an explosion happening from one node can be connected to many other nodes. And if it's active, if the connection is active, then it can multiply and become even more, activate even more neurons along the way. But some neurons will not activate, and this does not propagate the information further. Mm-hmm. But because of this time evolution, you have actual circuits, and this time dynamic is what giving the power basically of intelligence. Mm-hmm. So
pretty cool. So we're going to move into this question about languages that I think one of our friends submitted again.
Just one question to answer basically why money is the key driver here. And if you imagine a group, we already talked about groups basically coming together. Let's do a thought experiment where you have a bunch of apes and they are grooming each other's back.
Okay.
Right? And everybody has their own kind of identity, personality. Everybody's good at something and evolving into that. Somebody has a better understanding of motion. Another is better at hunting. Another is better at gathering some berries or something like that.
That's great.
And so there's this kind of grooming and reciprocity within the group. They also need to recognize each other, at least by smell or something else, who's who. And so they are helping each other out. It's a tit for tat relationship. And the bigger you make this group and the more evolved you make this group and put even language into play, the more you start to realize that you have more complex relationships. It's no longer, which you then virtualize through a token, like let's say a shell that you find that has a store of productivity, that has a hallucinated store of wealth. Right. And you then can exchange it into that token without knowing, basically, without having a direct relationship. So you can then have a baker and a car salesman. They exchange each other's product through a virtualized token without having a prior relationship, without knowing each other.
Right.
And that's the beautiful thing and the evolution of money. What you then realize is basically why money is upstream of language and culture is because it's such a strong forcing function around purpose, around what the group is producing, what is the net output and the net specialization of this group.
Right.
That it forces the relationships around that. And thus also the language, basically. And the language is the culture. It's an integral part of what shapes the understanding of language. So to give you one example, if you mind, is in German, you say, if the glass you destroyed and your mom is there, you say, she would say, why did you destroy the glass? And, I destroyed it. Would you say then as the little boy who's honest to his mom, right? Okay. But in Spanish, you would say the universe destroyed the glass, basically.
Oh yeah, I heard about it. How do you say it in Spanish?
Se me ha caído el vaso. Se me ha roto el vaso.
So the universe destroyed it.
Exactly. Yeah. It has happened to me, basically.
Right.
Whereas in German, you would take the blame. Like,
right.
Ich habe das Glas zerstört.
That's leading up to the next question. So do you believe the languages we speak shape our thoughts and identities? Can you give an example of a personal experience? This isn't a personal experience. Have you broken a vase before?
Say it again.
So do you believe the languages we speak shape our thoughts and identities?
That's basically
So exactly what you
that.
said. In Spanish, that the universe have conspired in a way that this happened to you, and in German, you're like, I take full responsibility even though I'm a 4-year-old kid. So, but I don't think people think about it this way, so maybe they do.
They don't, but the key the key point is that we reason in language. So all we ever do is, especially if we're idle, that is why doing something, anything really, even taking a walk, but especially something that requires attention because we are not proficient yet, that it doesn't require attention. So our brain is constantly optimizing for something. The more we repeat it, the more it is important to us, the more professional we become at something, right? And so in this case, I've lost my...
So the idea was that it's like, does language shape your thoughts and identities?
Right.
So, I think for people who are bilingual or multilingual, oftentimes they have this like situation when they're like dreaming in language, and then at one point they dream in another language and they're like surprised or shocked. It's like, I can dream in multiple languages? How's that possible? And
so what constitutes a human language? It's always around basically the compression of the external world in which you can compute at the speed of sound. Our brain doesn't allow for more. All human languages are constructed around a subject, an object, and a verb. The order differs, the grammar rules differ in accordance to the evolution of the society. This experiment in human organization, this nation state basically. The Germans are really complex in their grammatical structure. Whether it's helpful or not is something for the universe to decide. But it shapes everything, absolutely everything. So the language you cannot. The reason for that is because you don't know what you don't know. It sounds pretty trivial, but the implication of that is actually that anything and everything we do is a projection of our neural net, of our knowledge, of our neural network into whatever we perceive. That is why basically the more emotional you are, the less you reason, the more you will project your own fears and desires into the other group that you hate or that you despise. And so you will always say that they are doing this very same thing that you know from your very identity that you are core of to be basically the stuff to blame. Rather than reasoning through first principles in physics, why is something fundamentally the way it is, right? And this we see in this political divide that we have these days, manifested.
So from identity, we're going to talk about the opposite groups. But there's such a thing as group identity too. So we can talk about group identity. People are like identifying with the group, and much like I always do when it comes to hip hop. I'm a hip hop fan. If people say, "Are you a hip hop fan?" I identify with the group, of course. I'm a hip hop listener, fan. So, but there's this question we have from our friends. What is the difference between a strong circle and a weak one when it comes to groups?
Wow. So a strong circle, social circle, I assume, of course. It has to be everything. There's this kind of neuroscientist, philosopher called Joshua Buck, which I really admire. Initially, I'm fully conformant with a lot of his ideas, which are ultimately based on first principles and paper and basically what we have collected as a society. He says that love is a non-reciprocal relationship, so no guided by purpose. So it's about the purpose and no money involved. So no, it's a non-transactional relationship with purpose. So it's all about the purpose. And a strong social circle would be around purpose, a shared purpose that transcends transactional relationships.
Right. Wow.
A weak circle would have just a little bit more percentage of transactionality in that.
Interesting. Next one.
And you could make the thought experiment like, if you have a large nation state, right? You also need to protect the borders. You need a professional army.
Yes.
Because nobody wants to die, literally. So you could always defect and go to another group. So there needs to be something that keeps you fighting. And usually it's in a professional army, as the name already suggests, it's money. Unless you do the thought experiment and you have like some group that has such a strong belief that keeps them together and lets them fight for each other.
Like National Guard, always protect the Queen.
Yeah, in the old days, these days, that would definitely not work. The group is way too decoherent and way too large and so on. Even for money, many would not even protect it. So, yeah, and that's kind of the point here.
And what's a group dynamic that people underestimate?
A group dynamic that people underestimate? I don't know how to process this exactly.
Grooming like monkeys. That's an underestimated group dynamic.
Oh, okay.
Or for people like,
so
I don't know, playing darts together, underestimated.
Undervalue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, the reciprocity part of it, that it's not all money driven at all, and the usefulness part as well. So you cannot just basically thrive on a pure play of narrative if it isn't tied to the physical world, if it doesn't have a genuine purpose that is making the lives of people better at the end of the day.
Dude, that's an amazing note to say at the very end to our listeners. If you don't have a purpose for your group, go get one. Go get one, because positivity is on your way. Well, thank you so much for having me or joining me on this conversation. And it's been a joy, a pleasure, and a privilege. Always amazing to talk to you, Lorenz. And then see you at the next one.
Yeah, for me as well, Patrick. It was a real pleasure and a wonderful conversation. You're a good guy.
Thank you. High five.